Welcome to part 2 of the Broadland and Fakenham branch of Reform UK's event, A New Government, the First 100 Days. I hosted this event last month and it was absolutely brilliant. This part features Mark Littlewood and Dr David Starkey. Please do go back and watch part 1 if you haven't already. There's a link below. And please do give me your comments. I'd be really pleased to get your feedback. Without further ado, can we please give a big welcome to the stage to Director of Popular Conservatism, Mr. Mark Littlewood, and eminent historian and broadcaster, Dr. David Starkey. Thank you. So, tiny bit of background, and then I'll let these two eminent chaps get on. So I met Mark and David at a fringe event at the party conference last year, and the event that they hosted on behalf of PopCon was absolutely fascinating to me, and I am a public law nerd, and I was really delighted when they agreed to come and speak at this event. So, Mark, David, I know you're going to explain a little about the mission that you're on when you start your conversation, and you will be taking questions. But before I hand over to you, I'm just going to give you a sample of results of a poll that we sent to guests posing the question, what should be the immediate priorities for the new Reform UK government? I've got half a dozen here, and perhaps you might keep these in your mind during your conversation. Couldn't fit them all in, apologies. So repeal or replace all legislation that empowers identity politics. Overhaul the police forces. Cut the size of the state dramatically. Cancel net zero. Don't know what David's advice is on net zero. I can't wait. Develop a strong strategy for dealing effectively with the civil service and Whitehall. I like this one. Showing the merits of right-wing politics to future generations. And my personal favourite, work 7 days a week for the first month. So, on that energetic note, over to you chaps. Thank you.
Justine, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. Look, I'm going to start with a little bit of an advertisement and a little bit of a question. If you haven't heard of PopCon or Popular Conservatism before, let me tell you why it exists. I think yesterday, was our second anniversary, or we're very close to it anyway. I wanted to ask myself a question, and the question was this. And I was asking this before the general election, a general election that looked very obvious the Conservative Party was going to lose desperately and probably deservedly. And the question was, why after 14 years of Conservative government wasn't the United Kingdom more Conservative in any aspect whatsoever? None. I mean, pick your metrics. Tax at the highest level in peacetime. Public spending out of control, no sort of sound money, regulation had gone up, civil liberties had gone down, all sorts of insane woke nonsense like carbon net zero was not being merely entertained. Greta bloody Thunberg was on the press panel with Conservative cabinet ministers. Absolutely extraordinary. 14 years of an uninterrupted Conservative-led administration, and after those 14 years, the UK is not more Conservative at all. Why might this be so, was the question that I asked myself. And you can definitely point to the personal frailties of those 5 Conservative Prime Ministers. Maybe Cameron was really a Liberal. Maybe he was held back by the Liberal Democrats. Maybe Theresa May was too compromising. Maybe Liz Truss tried to do things too quickly. Maybe Boris Johnson shouldn't have eaten a slice of cake during lockdown. There are all sorts of personal frailties you could point to. But nevertheless, I think there was a bigger question. Had you just taken a snapshot of our country in 2010, a snapshot of it, and looked at all the data, tax rates, immigration policy, scale of government intervention in the individual lives of men and women, and another snapshot on the day the Conservatives led office. And imagine those are the only two snapshots you had. And with that information and that information alone, you had to try and work out what sort of government we had had over those 14 years. Well, you probably would have concluded that Jeremy Corbyn had been our Prime Minister for 14 years, or at least a woke, left-leaning, progressive, green-friendly, internationalist rather than patriotic government. And I wanted to try and find the answer to that question. And the gentleman on my right, unquestionably the greatest conservative public intellectual of our age, I think has answered it for me. And I very much hope over the next hour or so, he's going to answer it for you. Because I think working out that conundrum, not in a party political way, not in a point-scoring way, but to work out what went wrong when a supposedly right-of-centre party had the opportunity to change Britain and just drifted in the direction that was previously set. That's been the question I've asked, and I think we've got the answer, but you be the judge of that. So this is how it's going to work, if that's okay with you. Justine, I have taken a note of those 6 questions, 6 potential priorities for a reform government, and I'm definitely going to pepper those in. But I think once you've heard from David, you'll work out that we can probably solve all of them simultaneously, indeed need to, that they are not discrete problems. So, David, it's wonderful to be with you again, and thank you for the great service you've given this movement. And I'm going to start not with your grand philosophy, but with a simple question that now seems to explain the party political divide in modern British politics. And the reason given, at least, for Robert Jenrick switching from the Conservatives to Reform. And it seems to be based on this, doesn't it? Is Britain broken? And from what I can gather, Reform say, yes, it is, and it needs to be fixed somehow. The Conservatives say, or at least the Conservative leader says, it's damaged but not broken. But according to Robert Jenrick's account around the shadow cabinet table, there were 3 positions. 1, Britain is broken. 2, Britain is not broken. 3, Britain is broken, but we shouldn't admit that publicly. What's your take on the brokenness of Britain?
I think that to begin with saying that a country broken is to concede defeat. It is simply the statement, all we've got to do in this hall is to drink, weep, shed tears, go away and slit our throats, or go off to Zurich. So and oddly enough, I'm not very keen on that position, and I've lived my own life on a kind of cautious optimism. But what clearly is broken, and this is a point that was made very specifically and very clearly by one of the great, largely unrecognized conservative brains, John Redwood, our governmental structure is broken. Now, that is a cause of weeping, but it's also a cause of optimism, because it means politics can begin to solve it. And you're a political movement. You aim now to become a majority political movement, to have Farage as Prime Minister, so something can be done. Now, let's just quickly break down what we're really saying and why Robert and Kemi disagreed. What Mark has slightly slithered over, we are here...
Very good at doing.
He's very good at slithering. We are here amongst the enemy, because you may have heard, he said, we were called, if only it were true, Popular Conservatism. There's never been a sillier title, you'll forgive me, but the moment at which conservatism ceased to be popular, he chose it. But
Can I just say, I think conservatism is popular. It's just the bloody Tory party that isn't conservative, but isn't popular.
Right, okay, good. What we're dealing with is an argument about the nature of conservatism. And I think this is what we really need to focus on, what we really need to tackle now. And it goes back to all the questions that you were raising in your introduction. Broadly speaking, what happened was, or what we've got Robert on the one side, what we've got Kemi, if I pronounced her name correctly, which we know is now a matter of fundamental political divide. What each one of them is doing is raising a fundamental question about those 14 years. If you say the governmental structure is broken, what you're really saying is the Conservative Party in government from 2010 to 2014 effectively became a continuation of Tony Blair's New Labour. And this is the fundamental thing we've got to understand. We've also got to understand, and again, let me, having put that big idea there, let's revert to the questions of personalities. Mark, slightly less honestly, me very honestly, we have proclaimed that we sort of remain conservatives. Now, in public speaking, I always say there's an absolute element of pantomime. You failed. The moment we said we were conservatives, I was expecting hiss, boo, get off the stage and whatever. But I think you're revealing, ladies and gentlemen, aren't you, that almost all of you were. How many, can I ask an honest question? We've been honest. How many of you were Conservative Party members or have voted Conservative? The overwhelming number in the room. So what we're dealing with is a debate about the nature of conservatism. That's the essential debate. In other words, it's exactly like the 1970s when Thatcher had the same problem, or it's exactly, I would argue, going right back to the beginnings of conservatism in the 1830s and 40s. It's the debate between Peel and Disraeli. And we need to understand that. And once we've understood that, we can actually get somewhere.
So, David, what is that split then? It's not just about personalities and who's being loyal or
being loyal. This absurd business of suddenly everybody declaring, treating a political party as though it was a football club. He's a bloody football fan, and the amount that I've heard, I never even really knew where Southampton was, but never mind. And I know it doesn't really exist in the soccer table, but there we are.
That shows you are studying it seriously.
I know. But so what we've really got to do is to go back to why there is this problem. And because I think I've already got the sense that this is a serious audience. And the one thing that we've really discovered, we've been touring all over the country. We've been doing about 100 events a year. And what we've found is that reform events have a degree of passion, involvement, a desire to understand, which makes them unique. So let's go back to the beginning. We've got to understand conservatism begins in defeat. It starts, the very word is first used in 1835 with the Tamworth Manifesto after the Great Reform Act is passed, which destroys the old Tory party.
This is quite important to understand this, David, that although the name Tory is still in common usage because Conservative is too long to get into a headline.
Exactly.
Actually, this is a full rebranding of the party. It's just been known as the Tories, and now in 1835 it becomes the Conservative Party.
Because its central principles had been destroyed. The restricted franchise, the outlawing of Roman Catholicism from public life, they'd all gone. You to invent something new. But of course, and listen to this carefully, because it is a fundamental problem. If you say you're a conservative, basically it means you are at least sceptical about change, if not positively hostile. That's what the word means. But the position that's adopted in 1835 by Robert Peel is we accept this enormous constitutional change of 1832. So the question, ladies and gentlemen, becomes, having accepted a big change, where do you stop? And we can now see why there is this perpetual tendency to slither in conservatism, because it begins in compromise. It begins in the acceptance of change. And what I would like to argue is only one person of all our leaders. He's not our greatest prime minister, but he's certainly our greatest leader. He's our foundational leader, which is Benjamin Disraeli. Disraeli gets it right. And what he says is, and it's really worth listening to this, I think this, if one is trying to refound a Conservative Party, can I gently say, reform will simply eventually take the Conservative Party over. And it will be rebranded, but it will be re-understood. It will be re-empowered. What Disraeli says is this. It's really worth listening to it carefully. And by the way, it's worth thinking about the circumstances under which he made that remark. He makes the remark in Edinburgh, in one of the largest halls of the 19th century. He had stated it before in the Free Trade Hall in Manchester and even in the Crystal Palace in London. Ladies and gentlemen, he's addressing thousands of people without a microphone. He is talking for 2 hours. And do you know what he has to power him? 2 bottles of brandy, and we merely have a couple of glasses of red wine. You see the failure, the shabbiness of modern politics. But anyway, even powered by just a couple of glasses of red wine, Disraeli says the following. Britain is this is the great paradox. We are both the most progressive country and the most conservative country. And he says, Britain is a progressive country, so change is inevitable. And if you look in the Oxford Dictionary of Quotations, the quotation stops there. So Disraeli looks to be the answer. He looks like a wet. He looks exactly like a Cameroon. We just go with the flow. But what he says is something completely different and is much more fundamental and is what we believe in and what I hope will persuade you. I don't think you'll need much persuading. It's a question of defining ideas and terms. Disraeli then goes on and says, the question is not, will there be change? Of course there'll be change. It's what sort of change? Will change be in accordance with the traditions and customs of the country, or will it be in accordance with ruthless international liberalism? And this is the disaster. This is the catastrophe of the Conservative Party of 2010. Because what it did, thanks to Cameron, thanks to May, thanks to Johnson, was to buy in to the Blairite settlement, which was in fact a slow burn French Revolution, introducing these rootless principles of international liberalism that not only Disraeli, but also Burke in the generation before him had railed against. And this has been the disaster. This is the disaster of the incorporation of the European Convention on Human Rights. This is the disaster of the creation of the Supreme Court. This is the disaster of an alternative principle of the Constitution alongside the sovereignty of Parliament, of the rule of law, and finally, the catastrophe of a one-word piece of legislation, the Equality Act, which is probably the most stupid statute ever put on the statute book in Britain, which is responsible on the one hand for the bankruptcy of Birmingham and on the other hand for transgenderism. How one act of Parliament can do 2 such things is truly astonishing.
I think you'll find this audience are likely to agree with that. But David, I want to try and use your examples of Robert Peel and Benjamin Disraeli, and they're sort of sometimes you accept change. So in the case of Peel, the extension of the franchise, we're going to go along with that. In fact, Benjamin Disraeli, when he was Prime Minister, took that even further and enfranchised the working class, not merely the middle class. And so the job of somebody who sees themselves as a small c Conservative is to work out what change you adapt to, and has been in its literal meaning progressive, that brings progress, not in its current term, which means woke nonsense. That for some reason, the devil always has the best tunes, and they've coined that word for themselves as well. Whereas I consider myself progressive. I'm in favour of progress, but also in favour of conserving things. But what's that challenge now then? So what was it that the Conservatives wrongly preserved in their 14 years in office that they should have stepped away from? And can you give us some examples? Because in Peel's case, you said it was an acceptance of the widening of the franchise. In Disraeli's case, I think he broadly accepted a further widening of the franchise. So what changes either have been fought back against by Conservatives or should have been in the last 100 years or so?
Right. Well, let's answer the first part of your question first. What is the disaster in 2010? The disaster is to have been Conservative, apparently, like Robert Peel in 1832, to have said, we've seen a government, that's the Blair government, the Brown government, which has carried out this huge range of constitutional changes, of devolution, of the incorporation of the European Convention, of the Equality Act, of the Supreme Court, and to say this amounts to a new constitutional settlement. It's our duty as Conservatives, and by the way, it's also in our electoral interest, because we've had leaders like Haig or Ian Duncan Smith or Michael Howard who've all railed against this stuff and failed. Therefore, the only way we can get back into power is to accept it and to build on it. And I think that what is interesting is that at exactly the moment that settlement had come apart, i.e. the financial crash of 2008, you embrace the bloody thing and wed yourself to it, apparently irrevocably. But I think to bring home to us all why this is so disastrous, why did Disraeli further broaden the franchise in 1867? And indeed, that great speech from which I've quoted is the speech that he gives to justify doing that. Because Disraeli, like Boris Johnson, the one good thing about Boris Johnson, he recognised that it's a skilled working man. My ancestors, my father was a toolmaker, I'm ashamed to say, but
his father really was a toolmaker. This is true.
What I was going to say is he did a much better job. But I never thought he had it in him, but there we are. You know, my mother told. But there we are. We'll leave these little details aside. But what Disraeli was confident, and rightly confident, in the basic conservative instincts of the British working class. He understood that. He also understood that the people who are wedded to the silliest variants of international liberalism are the over-educated middle class. And that's exactly the position that we find ourselves in now. But let's look at what Blair was actually doing, because this is why no Conservative should have bought into it. What I think, again, has gone wrong with conservatism since particularly Disraeli, we've lost sight of the fact that the central fact in our history, the thing that if Britain ceases, and we hope it won't, but if it does, will be written about in the same way as the Roman Empire or the glories of Greece. We actually invented serious representative government on a large scale. That's to say, the idea of parliament, the idea of self-government of a whole nation, the idea that you are bound by law because you participated in the making of it. This, however, was complete anathema to Blair and Brown. They hated the idea of serious popular input into government. They believed that government should be a matter of two different things, the expert and the lawyer. And the entire structures of the Blairite state were designed to disempower the elected representative, the MP, in favour of the expert inhabiting the 400 and odd quangos on the one hand, and on the other hand, Blair himself, of course, being a preeminent example of this, as indeed is Starmer, the legal establishment on the other. And this is the catastrophe of those years of 1997 to 2010, and it's the even worse catastrophe that in that period of Conservative power, as you've described, from 2010, actually a government in office rather than in power, from 2010 to 2014, in every key decision, you exacerbated that. Yeah. You intensified it. You further. I think
blew it back an inch.
On the contrary, you intensified. With the result is that by 2014, Britain resembles Gulliver in Lilliput, tied down by this network of, on the one hand, the 400 odd quangos, and on the other, this absurd tangle, self-contradictory tangle of legalism and regulation.
Okay, David, this is really fascinating because we've given quite a kicking to the Conservatives, and a well-deserved one. But let's start with Blair, because I can remember when he was elected to office, and I didn't vote for the Labour Party. I voted for the Conservative Party in that election, and it feels a long time ago.
It is.
It was an early political memory of mine, as I'm fond of saying. I'm in my late 40s, my very late 40s. Well, I'm 53, so I'm in my extremely
all his figures are just as accurate. Yes.
You can see the economist in me right there. But I can remember when he was elected, and possibly even for his second term, I wasn't carried on this wave of cool Britannia enthusiasm, but there was a little part of me that thought, this is okay, you know. The Labour Party have won, and they're fairly right-wing. This is all right. I don't need to worry about Michael Foot or the Communist Party anymore. This guy's bought into the Thatcherite settlement. They're happy for hard-working people to get rich. They're happy for brilliant people to get rich. Capitalism has won. I mean, I would have preferred if the other side had won, but there didn't seem to be much in it. I think Margaret Thatcher, I don't know whether it's apocryphal or not, but
it's
you know, it's true. Was asked to sum up in 2 words your greatest success. She said Tony Blair. That the Labour Party had been forced into admitting the Thatcherite consensus. So I was all pretty relaxed at the time. Now, you have another story about how you experienced May 1997, which you should share with all the class, David.
Should I really? I spent the latter part of the evening with my head down the lavatory, vomiting up far too much expensive champagne. I had a sort of, again, like you, I had no very clear idea, but one had an instinct. Something was going to go wrong. And you know what? Again, I've only formulated the ideas that we are discussing now long after the event. And it's really important to understand historical understanding operates backwards. And which is why when historians pretend to be prophets, you should regard them as charlatans, because that's what they are. But for me, the dawning realization came, as I've tried to explain to you, that this was a deliberate destruction of what had been the most successful state in history. It was quite deliberately calculated. We're going to push aside, though we may discuss in questions, the whole business of devolution, which was fundamentally intended to destroy the traditional structure, the traditional broad political structure of Britain as a whole. It's also important to admit the complicity of my own discipline, of historians in that fact. People like David Cannadine, Linda Colley, Richard Evans, all got knighthoods out of deliberately rubbishing British history. And it's really delegitimating British history. But the more important thing is, I think you can look at 2 ancestors of all of this. One is the anti-national nature of the European Union, and obviously Blair's desire to assimilate to it. The other is the direct model of the post-45 German constitution, which is profoundly aware of the supposed complicity of the electorate in the rise of National Socialism. So what you do is you decide democracy as the simple meaning of the word, that's to say, the rule of the majority, is too dangerous because the majority can't be trusted. So what you've got to do, you've to deliberately put democracy into leading chains, legal leading chains, and experts. Put it into a smaller box and to make sure it doesn't get out, which is why you've had to invent this bizarre word populism, why the standard term of abuse that's thrown at Reform and Nigel Farage is populist. But if you bother to think about it, that's just Latin as opposed to democracy being Greek. It means should mean exactly the same thing.
That's right, I got the branding. We should just call ourselves the populist conservatives rather than the popular.
Populist conservative. Yeah. So, but I think what we should do is very quickly, let's try and do it quickly.
Because what I'm intrigued on, and you and I discuss this a lot, but I think most people in the audience table will get that world view.
Yeah.
But what did it mean in practical terms? What did that Blair government do, either under the table or in plain sight, to reduce democracy, to undermine our constitutional parliamentary sovereignty? Because, I didn't sort of notice it at the time. It just seemed to me a slightly modernising, cleaning up exercise. But
the word modernising.
Modernising.
What it really meant was replacing a system in which finally the centre of power and authority is this body called Parliament, this universal representative organ. And what you do instead, you now move into let's look at the two sides, the legal and the expert. Let's begin with the expert.
This is where power goes to.
This is where power goes to. Let's look at the role of the expert. You begin with the so-called independence of the Bank of England, the setting up of the Monetary Policy Committee. So the single most powerful instrument that the state commands in fiscal management, the setting of interest rates, you deliberately give to an independent expert body over which you can appoint members to it, but beyond that you have no control whatever. And moreover, it is not answerable to the electorate for any mistakes that it makes. And then that is succeeded by a huge cascade of 400 and odd other such bodies, appointed in the same way, with deliberately made non-accountable. And these are the quangos, the quasi-autonomous non-governmental organizations, which, remember, control about a third of state expenditure, over which, again, 500 billion, over which, again, you have no control. Now, again, it's important to understand both why this seems very, you see, again, why you were not alarmed, why most people weren't alarmed. In many ways, it sounds a very good idea. Experts are important. I'm one. In a kind of way you are, even though you only read PPE.
And not a proper sport.
Not a proper degree. But experts matter. But again, there's this wonderful phrase which is disputed between Teddy Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. They're talking about the ultimate expert, the scientist. You want your expert on tap, but not on top. In other words, you want input from experts, but you don't want to leave the final decision to them. Let's look at some of the problems.
Some examples.
I'm going to do just that. If you look, for example, at English nature has been directly responsible for two of the most absurd decisions ever taken. One of them is the famous bat tunnel on HS2. That is the decision that bats are terribly important, so we have to protect them. Yes, I understand that. Do we have to spend £100 million on constructing a bat tunnel? Now, if you think about it, you could have built 3 Ritz Bats hotels and given each bat a bat butler, for roughly the same price. And if you think bats are silly at £100 million, how about constructing a fish disco at £600 million to stop Sizewell slightly overheating a shoal of fish? This is genuinely demented.
Because these people only cared about
They only care about one issue. Government is about balancing things against each other, which is why we have a wonderful final example, which we just talk about quickly before we move on to law. We were actually ruled by an expert committee during COVID. We were ruled by SAGE. That's even the kind of, scientific advisory group. This is even taken directly out of the Greek philosopher Plato, who actually believed this was the appropriate means of government. We had the government of the Nobel Prize-winning philosopher kings. I'm, of course, an Aristotelian, and Aristotle gets it right when he takes the contrary view that the judge of a meal is not the cook, the expert, but the eater. And that's what government should essentially be about. But if you think during COVID, we had this very distinguished group of people. There were charlatans in it, of course, like Neil Ferguson from Imperial, but there were very real people. But what is the purpose of this committee? It is to stop anybody dying of COVID. Now, think about it. You've got a very simple test. What was, it turned out, the average age of death from COVID? It was 82 or 83. The average age of death is 81. Get COVID, live longer. And with this, what turns out, I think in most ways, certainly compared with Spanish flu, or any typical bad dose of flu, to be a rather minor disease, what did we do? We decided that the entire NHS had to become the National COVID Service. So it didn't matter if you died of cancer. It was positively welcome if you died of heart disease. You then go on and decide that in order to stop this infection spreading, although school children are not going to get it, you are going to incorporate school children in lockdown as well, with the result you destroy the educational patterns of 3 generations.
No trade-offs were made.
No trade-offs, and it's worse, you make no financial trade-offs. You incur, thanks to the whole business of lockdown, thanks to furlough, thanks to trying to keep the economy afloat, you incur debts of 400–500 billion. These are on a scale of a moderately serious war, which of course we're not capable of fighting, but that's another matter. And then finally, the thing that's most catastrophic with furlough, you establish the habit of getting something for nothing. Now, all of that is the result of single-issue government without the need for trade-off. Because, just quickly, finally, the only people who should have the right to determine that balance between one objective and another is the elected politician who's answerable to you.
Yeah. That is... I mean, that is so fascinating, and that is what happened, isn't it? I mean, I can remember those press conferences where the Prime Minister seems to be emasculated.
Totally.
We've just handed over power to Chris Whitty.
Johnson, that's quite an
Yeah,
achievement.
yeah. We've handed over power here to the Chief Medical Officer. They shouldn't have been on stage. It should have just been the Prime Minister, possibly the Health Secretary, explaining to the nation what was happening. But the experts weren't on tap. They were on top and on TV.
Never off it.
Never off
And
it.
they look at how they've been rewarded.
But there's a
People
second,
like Chris Whitty and whatever.
there's a second area, isn't there? So I get this. Blair and then the Conservatives go along with this and accelerate it. Hands a whole load of parliamentary power to SAGE, to English Nature, to the Equalities Commission, to Natural England, to the Arts Council, whatever, 400 of these bloody groups. We're now regulating football, for crying out loud. These people are going to decide how it's done. Not the market, not Parliament, these groups, 400 of them. As you say, they control a third of expenditure. I actually think it's worse than that, not in terms of expenditure, but they control, it's a guesstimate, 2/3 of the rules, right? Even if they only control 1/3 of the money, rough guess. But Parliament, our elected politicians, also bleed out on the other side of their body, right? So we've lost 2 pints of blood of parliamentary sovereignty to all these quangos. But we also seem to have lost it to lawyers and courts, which now seem to have become political. We've lost another 2 pints of blood out of the right side of our body. Quickly talk us through that.
Well, here again, there's a bigger question, which is the extent to which the right has lost control of language. The left has captured language. The central issue in all of this is human rights. Now, when you mention human rights, don't they sound lovely? Don't you all feel a cosy glow inside? You know, I call human rights Paddington Bear political thought, and you can see it with a little squidgy red, sort of red pork pie hat, you know, little sweet brown manila luggage label with a rather shaky handwriting, Peru, and a little bit of string round the neck, battered leather suitcase, this utter sentimentality. But what you've got to do is to penetrate behind your inner Rory Stewart. You've really got to get behind. And
that's going to be too difficult for most people in this room.
We're trying to get everybody to think imaginatively. So you've got to get behind you. And also let's be serious. We may indeed be wasting our time in we're already persuading the converted. But a lot of the country isn't converted. Your job is to convert them. And without that conversion, we will get nowhere. So the great problem is that the idea of human rights since 1945 has absolutely embedded itself in our minds. But think what it actually means. If you believe there's a thing called European or universal human rights, you mean there's a universal man or woman. You mean that people are detached from their history, from their country, from their nationality, from their tradition, which means, of course, and the left actually believes this, it's in the Green Party manifesto, the newly landed immigrant, tidy up his beard a little bit, wash him down, trim his fingernails, make sure the gun doesn't stick out too much, and he's just like you and me. And he will behave in exactly the same fashion, because we're all the same, aren't we? And we know this is a lie. But our law now incorporates this. This is the catastrophe. And it's really important that we understand the disaster of the incorporation of the ECHR in English law, because the ECHR is an extraordinary document. It's a product of the immediate heady aftermath of the Second World War, in which even people like Churchill and Quentin Hogg believe in world government and universalism and all the rest of it. But what it does, because it's formulated in these unbelievably broad terms, right to family life, any judge can make of it what he wants in complete opposition to the regular way in which parliamentary statute is written in Britain.
Can I just ask you on that? Because I thought that the principle in an English court is if it's confused, you need to divine what it was that Parliament was trying to express at the time.
Yeah.
And I'm told, although I'm no lawyer, that Article 8, this is your right to a private and family life at the time, although we can't be certain, essentially that was supposed to mean the Gestapo can't storm into your family home. It was not supposed to mean we can't kick you out of your country because of your son's preference on chicken nuggets.
No. But the problem is, if you actually look at that wording, all those limitations of the 1940s are not written into it. There is simply the open statement. And once the judges...
They call it an evolving document.
They call it a living instrument. It's exactly the same problem with the Constitution of the United States of America, why the Constitution has stopped acting, or stopped in the 1960s, acting as an effective instrument, because you build in this idea. But just very quickly, to go on from that, we've got to understand what lawyers actually did with this. And the key lawyer who's responsible for this is a man called Tom Bingham, Lord Tom Bingham. He is the one who uses the Human Rights Act to drive through an extraordinarily aggressive program of judicial assertion, of effectively saying that the best judge of the interest of the nation is not the elected politician, but the judge. And it has the most terrible consequences. He explains them quite clearly, wisely perhaps, in a lecture in Australia. And listen to this. This is what he says. Human rights law is counter-democratic. It is anti-majoritarian. It favours the minority over the majority. And he lists the minorities.
And this is deliberate.
This is now, ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about two-tier justice, this is not a turn of phrase. This is now accepted legal convention. And Bingham goes on and lists the minorities that are to be protected. They begin with the mentally ill. So the cases of Kalokane and Ruda Cabana are not an accident. They are deliberately protected. The cases of gypsies and whatever, again, they are the next group to be listed. In other words, every antisocial group enjoys a special protection against the majority. It is lunatic. This is the complete inversion of good government. And even worse, you then go on and deduce this principle that there is a thing called the rule of law, which effectively means judge-made law holds strength against parliamentary law, which is made with the input of the elected representatives. And you do this in the most outrageous fashion with the Supreme Court and its decision against Boris Johnson that the prorogation of Parliament was illegal. This is unthinkable. This reverses the entire precedent of the Bill of Rights of 1689. It stands on its head every single assumption of our polity. And yet, what did the Conservatives do? They backed off. And at every other stage on the whole of this dreadful process, they intensified what they inherited. So if we look at the Climate Change Act, which begins under Ed Miliband in 2008, it is intensified, legally entrenched, and the date brought forward by Theresa May in 2015 to 2050. Do we all realize, ladies and gentlemen, this means lawyers actually determine our extractive industry policy. Lawyers determine whether you can drill in the North Sea or whether you can frack, and they invariably say no. Lawyers now set wages. The absurdity of what's gone on in Birmingham under the Equality Act is worse than anything before Margaret Thatcher. At least before Margaret Thatcher, you'd have prices and incomes.
Can I just ask you, David, about, I'm not saying it was the most significant thing, but to my mind, it was the most eye-catching about the advance of the lawyers and the judiciary, okay? And that was when, it was 6 months ago, something like that. An issue had come up that a family from Palestine had been let in to the UK under rules that had been specifically written to cover Ukrainians. Right? Now, you can argue about these rules one way or another. Should we have been so generous to Ukrainians? Should we be generous, equally generous to everyone on the planet? Whatever. Anyway, Parliament came up with a specific scheme for Ukrainians, which the courts then interpreted to apply to a family who were clearly not Ukrainian.
And were in fact Gazan.
And were in fact Gazan. And this became a matter of debate over Prime Minister's questions between Badenoch and Starmer, in which, unusually, I think they actually largely agreed that the law shouldn't have been interpreted in that fashion.
Well, the Uniparty, isn't it?
Right, but they agreed, but this was the Uniparty against the judiciary, right? And the Lady Chief Justice then intervened in public debate. She didn't explain the decision. She didn't say, well, actually, Parliament said this under Clause 109. We could only possibly interpret their intentions in this fashion. I mean, surely they meant by Ukrainian, Gazan as well. That's the only way the courts could have possibly interpreted it. I'm confused.
As Oscar Wilde always said, an error of translation.
Yeah. An error of translation. No, she didn't say that. She came out and said, how very dare Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer discuss this over the dispatch box in Parliament? How very dare they? This is well above their pay grade. Now, as it happens, that might not have had particular impact on public policy in that particular instance, But that speaks to a Supreme Court above our sovereign parliament, doesn't it?
It does. And what is even worse, of course, and this is where Robert Jenrick, who is your most recent recruit, distinguished himself particularly with the whole business of pinning down two-tier justice with the decision of another quasi-legal body, the Sentencing Council, which decided that everybody who was not basically a white straight male, so I'm okay because I'm a puff. If I go up and
I'm absolutely.
You're done for. If I go up in front of the courts, I'm entitled to reference for probation, which we all know means a diminished term of imprisonment. And again, Shabana Mahmood said this equally, again, there was a uniparty, this equally was disgraceful, and once again, only much more powerfully, and with the whole of the judiciary behind her, Lady Justice Carr says, this is outrageous, this is against the separation of powers. Now, this is simply rubbish. This is saying that lawyers are entitled actually to set, not simply the sentencing what she said was judges must have the right to sentence in an individual case. Yes, they do, but they can't determine the rights of sentencing in broad categories.
It's a political decision.
That is a political decision, but there's been this complete erosion of the two. And the great task, one of the things we were challenged by the chairman, was to look at the big, broad issues that a reform government must deal with. There has to be a repossession of this entire sphere by those who answer to the people. There's got to be a clear understanding that the only proper element of national sovereignty, that thing that binds us all, is the popular vote, and that anything else is simply intolerable. But this will require an astonishing act of courage, that there is now an entire state structure against that view. It will have to be fought, it will have to be crushed, the proper tradition will have to be reasserted. But, ladies and gentlemen, that is not a revolution. That is a restoration. That's a bringing back of what's there before, of what is a tradition only done away with within the last 30 years.
That's so fascinating, David. So fascinating. And just before I come back to Justine with a range of questions from the audience, I'm conscious that I didn't weave in those that she asked.
I thought I'd do it for
you. Well, you did a little. You did a little. But I'm not surprised that members of Reform UK have asked these questions, which I scribbled down quickly. One was to get rid of DEI, essentially. One was reform of the police force, shrink the state, cancel carbon net zero, get the Whitehall and the civil service under control. Have a clearer right-wing vision. Justine, remind me if I've missed one. Oh, work 7 days a week in the early months. What's the... All of those are, I describe these as retail propositions. I totally understand that you want all of those done. Those all seem to me to be fairly reasonable demands in the last case of those who formed the government, but in every previous case of what the government should do. But what actually needs to happen? So forward wind to the world in which Reform do win a majority at the next general election, whenever that comes. What's it need to do? Does it need to have this kind of laundry list of 128 problems it needs to solve? Or is there a kind of bazooka or a particular way of tackling all of these problems simultaneously at once?
I think what we've got to understand is, if you look back at the Blair government and the left in general, they've understood one thing that we didn't. First of all, it depends on legislation. It depends on law. The strength of the whole business of so-called woke is because it's embodied in law, and it's also embodied in ruthless application of patronage. And so the first two things that a reform government has got to do is, first of all, to embark on a radical program of repeal. Just like Margaret Thatcher in 1979, you've got to undo before you do. You've to cut trade union power. You've to denationalise industry and whatever that was then. Now you've got to tackle those pieces of landmark legislation of the Blair government. You've got to repeal the incorporation of the ECHR. You've got to undo the Equality Act. You've got to undo the Constitutional Reform Act. There is the Equality Act, and more or less the last act of all, which is the one that affects the terms of service of public servants and whatever. All of that has to be undone. It's probably got to be undone at once, because each one of these things supports the other. They're intertwined. It's like a hydra. And then the other thing you've got to do is to use patronage ruthlessly and brutally. If the Quangos or whatever of them survive, you've got to pack them. You've got to pack the House of Lords. In other words, you've got to take back control from all, deliberately Gordon Brown hived all these things off to committees of experts that he knew would deliver the right result.
He knew would be populated by his people.
By his people. And this is exactly what's gone wrong with the universities, the Church of England, the lot. But this has got to be repossessed. You've got to, as it was traditionally, these are appointments by the monarch on the advice of the Prime Minister. This has got to be brought back. So there's got to be a great repeal and restoration, and then there's got to be a ruthless exercise of patronage, which means we need the right people to patronise. And ladies and gentlemen, I imagine about half of them are sitting in this room, so feel smug.
David, thank you very much indeed. It's been an amazing chat. Justine, you've got pre-prepared questions. I should just say, as Fiona Bruce says on Question Time, we have not had sight of them. Is that true? We have not had sight of them. So I'll hand over to you, Justine, to fire the questions at us.
Oh, sorry. May I approach the bench? I'm going to sit up here if that's all right. Okay. So the first question is from Carl Catchpole. And I have a very, Jamie Waldron. I hope Jamie's here. There's a question from, Jamie's here. Wonderful. And the last question is highly controversial, and that's Richard Sear. And we're going to put some, I'm just letting the people know so they can be very clear what their questions are. And I think we've got until about 10 o'clock. So if we run out of pre-prepared questions, then we'll throw it over to the audience. And Mark does have a rule for how questions need to run. Can you just share that?
So I share this rule in every event I'm at, but particularly those with David. I appreciate people wish to share their opinions, make interjections, give a commentary, sometimes give a lecture. You are entitled to do all of those, but they must be no more than one sentence long, and they must end in a question mark. Agreed on the ground rules? Those are the ground rules.
Let us begin. Mr. Catchpole, your question, please.
Thank you, gentlemen, for coming tonight. My question is, David has actually touched on it already. Is it imperative that Nigel asks the King to appoint members of the House of Lords straight away? Nadine Zahawi, Nadine Dorries would be probably good members of the House of Lords. And yeah, do you think that would be a great benefit? We need people in the law.
Got it. I mean, well, I think we're going to take three, David.
Okay, right, we're doing that. Sorry. Yeah, we're doing.
Yeah, yeah, Jamie's next. Are you ready, Jamie? Oh, you're getting the mic right. She's here, Alice. Oh, by the way, Alice has been amazing at helping organise this event. Alice has got a question. I've just read it. It says test. So I'm not going to ask Alice to do a question.
So that might be a very good question.
It might be a very good one. Jamie.
Yeah, thank you both. Yes, my question was that history suggests two broad responses to either pressure or injustice on a society. So in some cases, so like the French Revolution, society gets angry and it erupts and it's very reactionary, and in other cases, perhaps like Britain's own response to the French Revolution, it's a very muted response. It's very depressive, and people accept the defeat and the decline. So my question really is, for modern Britain, which trajectory do you think Britain is going down, and does that depend on the party in power in 2029?
I think he broke the rules, but we'll let him off. I think we're going to save Richard for a moment until the end, because he does have the killer question. I've got an anonymous question, which I'll read on behalf of the submitter. In 1974, Anthony Fisher wrote a book called History Must Repeat Itself, ? What is your answer to that question? And how do we increase individual choice and reduce compulsion in Britain today?
Okay. David, I'll share my thoughts here as well, rather than just being the MC, but I think I'll start with you on each of them. So the House of Lords, what is to be done about that if you imagine a scenario in which the party balance, the ideological balance in the Commons is not reflected in the Lords at all? Reform, I think, have one peer. I'm told they may get a second before too long. But, I mean, this is hardly representative of the support that Reform has in the polls, and that's not likely to tick up measurably. So, again, in the scenario in which they win the election, do you flood it? Do you abolish it? Do you trim it? Do you keep banging on about the Salisbury Convention in the hope that you can get things through without too much ping-pong? It goes to your patronage point a bit, I guess.
Yeah, I think the position's quite clear, and there are clear precedents in both 1832 and 1910, in other words, moments of absolutely shattering political change. The Crown was brought to agree that if the House of Lords did not back down, because the House of Lords is the heart of it's a quangocracy. It's the quangocracy in Urban, and it's not actually Urban. It's called Miniver. It's actually rather moth-eaten rabbit fur, but there we are. If they will not back down, there has to be a mass creation. And I think, probably bearing in mind the need for speed, I would actually go for the mass creation first. I don't think the Salisbury Convention will hold, that it is only a...
Remind people what the Salisbury...
The Salisbury Convention is that if something is... It's worked out from the 1940s onwards and increasingly refined, but broadly it amounts to, if there's an explicit commitment to a piece of legislation in the party manifesto, the House of Lords will not oppose it in principle, but it reserves the right to amend. But of course, that can be used to infinitely delay. So I would go for mass creation.
That's really interesting. I had considered the House of Lords to be one of, but probably not one of the principal blocks on a reform government were one to happen.
I think,
and I now think I'm wrong.
I think you are. I think you are wrong.
And I'll tell you for why I think I'm wrong. I mean, that probably I've watched too many episodes of Yes Minister, so I assume it's all Sir Humphrey Appleby who's the problem. But I was also persuaded that the House of Lords could be the biggest problem for a new government that wants to restore Britain, for the reason that you just touched on, David, that it is no longer a kind of constitutional backstop with a load of crusties saying, well, I'm not so sure about this. I think you might want to think again. We'd just like to refine it a bit. The Quango state is populated by these members of the House of Lords. It's their living, right? I mean, they're paid quite well just for turning up, but they are typically sitting on the Environment Agency Board or a consultant or the Law Lords. So, oddly enough, it sounds odd saying this as a Conservative, doesn't it? But that body is likely the enemy.
You see, but again, it's very important. I mean, making the big... Sorry, this is diverging from the questions. This, again, we risk falling into the trap of 2010, that what you do is you conserve a recent unjust settlement in the name of continuity, rather than looking back at the big picture and the fundamentals, which is why the debate that's going on between Jenrick and Badenoch is actually so important. One has to realize where the balance of Disraeli's tradition, national continuity really lies. But you've also got to do something else, which is what no politician, not even Farage has done. You've got to explain. Our politicians seem to me to have lost the talent of explaining. And the only way, again, in which a reformed government, or indeed a broader conservative coalition, whatever it would look like, is going to be able to do any of this thing, it has got to have first, which we haven't discussed, it's got to have not only a big majority like Starmer, but it's got to have a big majority which is actually rooted in a genuine popular support. 30-odd% might get you the Commons, it won't get you the country.
Especially if everybody's a superannuated local council.
And all
They
of
need
that.
to be true believers.
There has to be that broader support. But I think it even goes beyond that. You need what I would like to see. And this again, I know you're all engaged in the frantic process of building a political party from scratch, but we are going to need something like the Vote Leave campaign. We're going to need a broad campaign of national persuasion. These issues, we see, because we travel so widely, you can feel this sense, the terms, you're the one, Mark, who has picked on this word again, make America great again.
The important word is again.
Is again.
It's a reversion to something.
It's a restoration. And similarly, we want our country back. There's an awareness that, and this is a profoundly conservative feeling, that you've been robbed of something recently. We're not calling for a revolution. Again, my blood freezes when I hear people calling for Oliver Cromwell. Do you know what you're calling for God's sake? I mean, the unspeakable Puritan revolution of the 1650s, abolishing Christmas, I mean, a military dictatorship, arbitrary justice, the rule of major generals. Monstrous.
Well, that goes a bit into Jamie's question, which is revolution or muted response. I mean, actually, the Starkey position is it's not a binary choice. You can restore. It's interesting you just touched on Cromwell. We had a revolution, but he was our one and only great protector.
Yeah.
We walked it back.
We walked it back deliberately. And you see, I think, again, Jamie, the text that brings the real position home most clearly are the two great works of Edmund Burke, the Reflections on the Revolution in France and the Letter on the Regicide Peace. And in the Letter on the Regicide Peace, written against Pitt, when he makes peace with Napoleon, what he argues is France will only recover if it restores properly, if it undoes these horrors of rootless international liberalism. And of course, France was never able to do that. And France has never established political stability. You're on the Fifth Republic, and we're about to get the Sixth, if indeed it remains a republic. You've already had two empires, two monarchies, and because the French believe in inventing extraordinary things, a prince-president thrown into the mixture, and that's in 200 years. And so, ladies and gentlemen, all of this talk of revolution, please not. Revolutions are catastrophic. They invariably preserve the worst features of the old regime. That's what they do. They don't
restoration, not
we
revolution.
need restoration, not revolution.
And then I think that the last question was 1974. History must repeat itself, right? Now, you've already touched on this, David, to some extent. But what was intriguing in the remaking of the Conservative Party from, or the Tories from Tamworth onwards, Disraeli and the rest, was the mid-1970s were a point of complete reinvention of the Conservative Party. The approach of Ted Heath, certainly in the last 2 years of the 1970 to 1974 government, in which a range of people served, like Margaret Thatcher and Keith Joseph, but upon defeat, the party was ideologically reconstructed at speed. I'm assuming that's what the question is touching upon. What's the right analogy there? Or are we comparing apples with pears? Or has the Conservative Party not learnt the lesson of what needed to be done after the wake of its defeat 50 years later?
I think that the the analogy of Margaret Thatcher and Keith Joseph in terms of the need to recognise that the Conservative Party has to escape from a period of uni-party rule is absolutely right. And what is very clear, and in complete contrast, the position that Badenoch has adopted, Thatcher understands that. And you get Keith Joseph. Keith Joseph uses language astonishingly similar to Robert Jenrick. I know I effectively wrote the speech, but there we are. And what essentially Keith Joseph says is, just quickly to fill in the background, when Churchill comes, again, it's exactly this business of preserving what you shouldn't preserve. When when Churchill comes to power in 1951, he knew he should have reversed the changes of the Attlee government. He does nothing. And moreover, there's a very considerable strand of Conservative Party thinking, headed by R.A.B. Butler, that chimes completely with Labour Party thinking as represented by Hugh Gaitskell. A uniparty. And interesting enough, Hugh Gaitskell had been to a much grander public school than the Tory, but that's another matter. And that continues really right up to the middle of the 1970s with nationalisation, prices and incomes policies, the worship of the NHS, the whole Keynesian economics, the whole thing. And it's Keith Joseph in 73, 74, who writes this extraordinary pamphlet in which he says, I call myself a Conservative. I hadn't been a Conservative. I'd been a member of a Conservative government which had done nothing Conservative. And then you get that extraordinary readdressing of this from 74 to 79. The thing which is, so that approach is the right approach that we take. But the actual, the content of it, I think, is a much more debatable one. Because
it's constitutional rather than economic.
Now the problem is constitutional, then the problem was economic. Yeah.
But it's the same. It's to reinvent yourself rather than just say we're under new management.
To restore yourself, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Justine, sorry, we'll take some more.
So I'm just going to give some names, but I'm going to pull a bit of rank and ask a question myself, it's okay. So you've talked a little bit about quangos. So my question is, I think you've got a theory, Mark. I think you think there are 3 things that we should do to quangos to deal with them. It's a bit of a slice, dice and thrice, I guess. So that would be my question. And then we've got a question coming from Councillor Mike Westman. We have Mrs. Jessica Owen, which is a very detailed question, so perhaps you could truncate it a little. And I think Peter Freeman's got a question, and then the final audience question is from Richard Sear, which is the one that might be a little bit controversial. The Councillor Westman? Mike Westman? Councillor Mike Westman, is he here? Thank you. Anybody else who I've named, if you could put your hands up, that would be very helpful. Jessica Owen? Oh, there's Jessica Owen. And Peter Freeman, he's sat right at the back.
Gentlemen, good evening. My question is, what should an incoming reform government do to stem the rising tide of anti-Semitism in today's Britain? Thank you.
Jessica next, is that right? Jessica. Oh, yeah.
I'm wondering if the panel, what the panel's thoughts are on restating the citizenship as a vehicle to describe the principles, benefits and responsibilities of us all as citizens.
Thank you.
Peter Freeman?
Hi there. Question really is, how can reform remove the Golga Frenchens from the public sector?
Remove the golden...
Golga Frenchens. It's Douglas Adams.
You're going to need to put that in English. Sorry, but...
So I think you're referring to the hitchhikers, guys, to the guys.
Middle management.
Middle management.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
there was yours, Justine.
Mine's about your sliced dice and crackers. And then we've got Richard Sear he's got the final question. I think he's there, Alice.
How do we successfully argue against the notion that Reform UK will only be successful if Nigel Farage remains at the helm of the party?
So, David, quite an eclectic mix there. Let's start with Mike and anti-Semitism. I'm going to be honest with you, I haven't got a solution here, really. I'm just horrified by what's unfolding. I think there was a poll today saying 61% of Jews in Britain no longer feel safe and are actively considering leaving the country. Now, I can't directly compare this to Kristallnacht in Germany, but I wouldn't be surprised if the numbers are about. This speaks to a true horror, doesn't it?
It does.
So what's the government response to that? Because I also don't want another quango for a commission for racial equality and religious minorities. Just to put the 1930s stuff in context, and this is a populist point rather than a really well thought out one, on LBC today, if you haven't seen it, there's a great caller, I think his name's Darren, he phones into the Nick Ferrari show, and Nick Ferrari is a presenter who's I'm ideologically sympathetic to. But the guy who phones in says, I'm really confused here. Why is the Labour government continually accusing Reform of being fascist? Because I tell you what I'd expect a fascist government to do. Cancel elections. Abolish jury trial. Try to bring in digital ID. Get in dubious arrangements about giving off our territory to other powers who we're not sympathetic to.
That's not no, that's not fascist. You take other people's. You take other people's.
Or you enter an arrangement with. But it goes to the same thing, doesn't it? That is something more sinister happening here than we are aware of.
I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I think there's a rather simple solution. Let's again, one of the things Reform has been very good at doing, but hasn't yet perhaps gone far enough, and I've undoubtedly gone too far on the subject, calling things by their proper names. The reason for anti-Semitism is twofold. It is Islamism on the one hand and the idiot embrace of Islamism by the radical left on the other. We know exactly why this happens. And what we need, and again there is great precedent in British history, we need to take a religion which pretends to political power under political control. The only question is how we do it. One method would be to resort, and if there are Roman Catholics here, they will forgive me, but there was a period of time when Roman Catholicism was also associated with the murder of political leaders that it didn't like, in which the Pope claimed to be able to make and unmake rulers, and so on. And in Britain, we came up with a series of solutions which didn't involve persecution, but which involved the control of religious leaders, the importation of religious legislation, and so on. I would be in favour of reviving and adapting that legislation to deal with Islam.
Now, Jessica asked a really interesting question about citizenship, and I'm open-minded on this, but I've got a little bit of an anecdote to share. That it seems we haven't got this quite right. Okay, so I have a long-term friend of mine. She's a French lady about my age, has I think now become a British citizen. But she took me through the citizenship quiz that she needed to complete in order to become a British citizen. I should add, she is a high earner, an intelligent woman, a law-abiding woman, etc., etc. She's probably the sort of person we would want to become a British citizen. She loves Britain more than she loves France, I would say. But the citizenship questionnaire was like a pub quiz. It was things like, what's the flower of Cornwall, right? And, I would have failed it for sure. She worked out how to research it such that she could tick all of these various boxes. But it wasn't really a test of citizenship. It was a pub trivia quest of general knowledge. And speaking to Danny Kruger, and I think he's mentioned this to you as well, although it does seem a little bit nebulous and ephemeral to me, but I'm still pondering it. Should we go back to some form of oath that needs to be taken by those who wish to become citizens? You could also apply this to people who are in public service, that civil servants should be loyal to the Crown, not to the ECHR. I think that our military could be undermined by this as well. So, although it sounds a bit like Cub Scouts honour, isn't there something slightly more profound in that, rather than asking people what the anthem is of the Welsh rugby team or what other ludicrous things were on this citizenship test?
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, the problem is that we are completely confused. Fundamentally, we don't know what citizenship means. And that is a result, clearly, of the fact we used to have a completely clear notion what being a citizen of Britain meant. From 1607, from the so-called Calvin case of 1607, this was designed to deal with the fact England and Scotland had been united under the Crown. The rule was decided that anybody who was born in Britain was therefore a subject of the Crown. That was then extended, of course, when the Empire was created. So everybody was a subject of the Crown, whether in the American colonies, the Australian, the New Zealand, the African colonies were. And then, of course, as the Empire begins first to separate into self-governing states and then to dissolve from 1948, you resort to a series of bizarre limitations of that, which are entirely incoherent. This is the problem. We've now got a completely incoherent view of citizenship, as exemplified perfectly with that dreadful man, Alaa el-Fatah, the man whose testimony for British citizenship was to say he particularly hated the British, who were, of course, responsible for all the wicked things in the world. And what's interesting is, when he was put up for a prize, the Israelis instantly said, gosh, this man has said all sorts of anti-Semitic things, and he was prevented from getting the Sakharov Prize. When he's up for British citizenship, the British state thinks it's completely normal to say you hate Britain.
Why are we so masochistic?
Because after all, most of them do. The entire structure of our social sciences in the universities is based on hating the West.
Yeah.
We've got ourselves into this mad world. But I think El-Fatah was particularly interesting. And again, we don't realise just how ludicrously accidental his citizenship. It depended on two things. The fact that his mother had been born here in 1956 to parents who were research students, and she'd lived here from the age of 0 to 2. There's then a series of legislation subsequent to that, which says, as well as a man who was born here, as well as children conceived in wedlock, a woman or a child not conceived in wedlock can also claim citizenship. But that stops in 1984, and he's born in 1982. So two extraordinary chances to apparently turn this.
Why do you think that became a cause célèbre then? I mean, it was madness.
But sorry, this is a highlight as to how lunatic our rules of citizenship are. But at the same time, we've invested this sheer piece of paper, which is meaningless in terms of attachment, devotion to a country, to absorption of a tradition, even to speaking the language. We invested with the same degree, at least the radical left, the Starmerites do. We attach it with the same degree of seriousness that Palmerston did. So we feel, but this man is a completely accidental citizen of Britain, and yet the left says we must send in the gunboats. The equivalent of it, Civis Britannicus sum and whatever. We've got to rescue this man from an Egyptian jail. So there's a total incoherence. As there is in so much of our public life. I mean, if you look at why nothing can be done in Britain, it's because every single agency of government and every single law and every single agency fights with all the others. We're in a state of complete absurd conflict.
I mean, what on the Al Fatah case? Sorry to prolong this, but I think it's interesting. What's extraordinary to me was not that he just sort of slipped through. It wasn't sort of, oh my God, sorry, we didn't particularly look at that piece of paper. You're quite right. Some lazy civil servant must have hit the green button rather than the red button. I mean, this was a massive coordinated effort by the cultural left. The Prime Minister then tweets out saying, to achieve this was a top priority of our government.
It was espoused by Rishi Sunak. Sorry, forgive me. Thank you. It was espoused by Rishi Sunak. It was espoused by Liz Truss. It was James Cleverly.
Yeah.
I mean, but again, there's a really interesting point here, that the extraordinary diffusion of our government means that it's particularly vulnerable to pressure groups and interest groups. And most of these are also state funded. So you get things like the Refugee Council. You get things like Liberty. They all receive massive amounts of state funding, usually to campaign against.
So they're sock puppets.
They're sock puppets, but they're sock puppets
Funded by you.
Funded by you, which is what is so intolerable.
Now, Peter asked...
Could I just interrupt them? I'm just conscious of time. So Peter's question, I think he'll forgive us if we leave his question on middle management, and he can take it up with me later if he doesn't like it. I am married to him, so I'll take the flak. That's fine.
You're taking the hit then.
I'll take the hit on that one. You can email me the answer. And in terms of the question I asked you about quangos, I think there's probably a 3-word that, and then we can go to Richards, and we're coming up to time.
I think we'll be able to knock all these. I mean, Peter was asked about middle management and the civil service. Here are some numbers to conjure with. 4.5 million Brits are now employed as civil servants or public sector workers. 1.5 million of them are in the National Health Service. Now, I support universal, free at the point of use health provision. I just want to make that plain. But there's always a battle in the National Health Service, well, not a battle, but an interesting stat on which is the biggest employer on planet Earth. And for the last 20 years, this has varied between the Chinese Red Army, the nationalised Indian Railways, and the National Health Service. The National Health Service is now running away with it at 1.5 million. And as I joke, I think it probably kills more innocent people than the Chinese Red Army. Although that is not its intention. I mean, it's a disaster zone. It's got a couple of the areas that you would want. And I think this is why it's popular, that it's universal, free at the point of use. That people in affluent societies don't want to just face the risk that I mean, we need insurance against this sort of stuff. But those principles are abided by everywhere else in Europe. There is universal healthcare provision everywhere in Europe. Everybody says it's the NHS or the American system. It is not. The US system and the UK system are vying to be the two worst in the Western world. So I like trolling my Remainer friends by telling them that they're little Englanders. And I think we've got quite a bit to learn from Europe. And why would they be against the Danish system or the Dutch system of healthcare that seems to be enormously better than ours and has those key principles of universality? On middle management, I mean, the NHS is the key example of it. On the quangos, Justine, right? So what's to be done here? And I haven't done this exercise myself, so it's just how I'd approach it. So there's 444 roughly of these quangos, these unelected groups, whether it's English Nature, the Sentencing Guidance Council, the Environment Agency, the Bank of England, or whatever. And I would just set up a pretty simple spreadsheet here. I'd list them in alphabetical order down one side. And I would work out what you're going to do with their functions in 3 columns, right? One would be abolish it. None of this is going to survive. The thing you're involved is a completely pointless process. It will simply not happen anymore. We're switching it off. The second is privatise it. There might be some of this that can be done by the private sector. I think some elements of, for example, Ofcom could go back to self-regulation by TV stations rather than it being a state regulator. And the third, in which I would expect most of the tally to be, actually more than half of the tally, if you say take something like flood defence, right? You shouldn't abolish it. It's not obvious that a free market could provide it. We might have an argument about that, but it's not obvious that it could. All of the bits that need to be done come fully within ministerial control, right? So the Environment Agency goes straight under the Environment Secretary. There's no independence about this, right? Natural England trying to protect bats and bloody fish goes under the Minister for Endangered Species, right, if you're going to retain any of that. And virtually nothing is left as independent from Parliament. Maybe one or two bits of the Bank of England remain slightly independent. The judiciary needs and the police need to have some independence. Operational independence has been overstretched, but I don't want to live in a scenario in which the Home Secretary phones up top cops and gives them a list of people they want arrested that night. I mean, that's a police state. But by and large, you strip out this supposed independence and you either abolish it, privatise it, or put it under ministerial control. And you've done that whole spreadsheet coloured yellow, amber or red or green for all of them, and you go into government and then execute it. That'd be my advice. David, what do you think on that?
I would agree.
Okay. That was as simple as Then I think our last question, which was very short and therefore quite pointed and is interesting to talk about, was Nigel Farage at the helm, right? Is this a one-man band? Can Nigel work with anybody? Is he actually even crucial? Supposing he is hit by a bus, is the whole game up? I mean, he's a remarkable figure. He's easily the most influential politician of the last 20 years, isn't he? By far. I mean, he's changed British political history, despite only having become a member of Parliament for Clacton 18 months ago. It's absolutely incredible what he's done this far. But does he end up being a Churchill or a John the Baptist?
We don't know. And it's really important that one understands the fancy word is aleatoric, a measure of, from the Latin for a dice, an element of chance. We don't know. We can't know. But equally, it seems to me that the extraordinary, what I think is the determining factor in the last few months is where we are now, looking at you. This astonishing creation of a political movement on this scale, the largest membership party created in little more than 18 months. And I think that again, the calibers, and I am sounding very unlike Starkey in that I'm being openly flattering, but it's not. I'm simply trying to convey what the experience that Mark and I have had. It is the astonishing levels of organisation, of commitment, of enthusiasm, of innovation that we've seen. And this, I think, is something that will continue. I also think that reform itself and Nigel, perhaps a little bit too used to being a one-man band, has not actually used as well as it could be. Because the only way that finally Farage will make the impact that I think he wants to make, I think he would like to be a prime minister who has a status, because what he's been able to do, he's been a kind of Archimedean lever. He's been able to lever the political system from the outside. I think
correcting the Conservative.
Very much usually correcting. And what I think he would like to do is that last chapter of the career in which you do what I've been talking about, that great repeal and restoration, and put the thing back on the right path. But I think obviously that will be the point at which he would probably want to stop and to hand over. It will be a moment of genuine nobility. And I think perhaps, and again, let me be honest, I've had a lot of doubts about Nigel. Anybody with rational would. look, no, being very serious. If you look at the record of the apparent inability to work with people of similar talent, good friends should be honest friends. This is not sneering. This is not chipping away at the margin. This is saying what I hope will be helpful to success. I think the very fact that people like Robert Jenrick, in particular, and Dennis Danny Kruger have been recruited. These are figures of a simply different level from whom he's worked with before, and I think they offer extraordinary prospects of that kind of fulfillment. Again, one uses perhaps overground language of a genuine mission, of a genuine moment of national transformation. Because, ladies and gentlemen, I think why you're in the party, I think why you've helped to create it, certainly the reason Mark have been doing what we are doing, we all, in one way or another, and with different degrees of conviction, of certainty, of hope, of fear, we all recognise we're in a moment of genuine national crisis, and that if good citizens don't act, 1,000 years and more will disintegrate. We've just got to hope, I suppose. He is our best hope at the moment. We've got to hope it's fulfilled.
Well, I think, I don't know about you, but all my Christmases came at once this evening, listening to these guys. I hope you've had such a wonderful evening and enjoyed listening to our panelists from part one. So we had Jimmy Lee, we had David Bick, we had Dan Barker, and we had a wonderful time with them. We've had Mark Littlewood, we've had Dr. David Starkey. If you would like to find the guys online, David has brilliant YouTube videos. He does loads of stuff with Jacob Rees-Mogg. You can go and see his David Starkey Talks. Well, yeah, I don't know if that's a particular podcast, but I've missed that one. I'm surprised. I watch about 10 hours a week. And Mark's got the popularconservatism.com. Go there. You can sign up, and they have great little Zoom calls, and they have really interesting speakers. So it's well worth following the guys, because the ideas that they are going around evangelicizing, if that's the right word, evangelizing all around Reform UK branches, and the people are on the right of politics, not just correct, on the right of politics. And it is really, really important, the message they're bringing, which is not just about let's get loads of candidates and get into government, because when we get into government, we've actually really got to make it work, and we've got to hit the ground running. And we need people like this in our party, or helping our party, to make sure that we can achieve that, because that will benefit all of us. It will benefit us, it will benefit our children, it will benefit our communities and our grandchildren, and all those great things. So with that, I would just like to say thank you very much to all of the committee, particularly Alice Kemp, wherever she is, has been amazing. She's at the back. Give a round of applause to Alex, please. She's been absolutely amazing. Jamie's done so much. Michael, who just came to watch and ended up doing all the video, absolutely incredible effort. He came all the way from Yorkshire, bless him. Thank you very much. So I am very grateful. I hope you had a wonderful evening. I would like to give Mark and David a huge round of applause. Then I'm going to just ask our branch chair just to close the evening officially. Big round of applause for Mark and David. Thank you very much.